Hello and welcome to GCSE English Language and English Literature at MEA. Thank you so much for taking the time to try and find out a little bit more about the two courses, and hopefully you will be able to find out everything you need to know from the following presentation. So the first thing that you need to be aware of is that you actually get two separate GCSEs for English. You get one for English language and one for English literature, and they will come as two separate qualifications and two separate GCSE grades and certificates. So with English language, there are two papers that you will need to study for that. The first one, as you can see here, is all about creative reading and writing. And the purpose of this paper is to explore different creative texts and to give you an opportunity to write creatively and express yourselves in that sort of more descriptive and narrative writing style. And the second paper is all about a writer's viewpoints and perspectives. The purpose of that paper is to allow you to explore how writers might have different viewpoints and different perspectives on certain issues or certain themes and topics, and to also give you an opportunity to create some more viewpoint style writing or writing to argue and persuade. For English literature, again, there are two papers that you will study for English literature. Paper 1 contains Shakespeare and the 19th century novel. So for us at MEA, our Shakespeare text is Macbeth and our 19th century novel is A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. And then on paper 2, you will study a modern text. So for us, that's the play An Inspector Calls by J.B. Priestley. And you'll also have a poetry element. So you will get an anthology of poetry where there are 15 poems that you will need to be familiar with, but there's also an unseen poetry element as well, which I'll explain in a little bit. So for those English language papers, paper 1, the creative one, the focus is very much on fiction texts, and you could be given a text from the 19th, the 20th or the 21st century. They will be texts that you have probably never ever seen before, and they will be extracts from larger fiction works. So for example, from a larger novel or another work of fiction. And you will be expected to read and understand that text and then to do some analysis and evaluation of the methods and the techniques that a writer has used. You will also have an opportunity to do some narrative and descriptive writing, and you'll be able to create your own creative text, and that will be linked to the topic from those fiction sources earlier on. You will also be given an image that you can use to support you with that creative writing, and you could be asked to do a piece of narrative writing, so a short story, or a piece of descriptive writing. For paper 2, you will again potentially get a text or two texts in this case from the 19th, the 20th or the 21st century. One will always be an older text, one will be much more modern, and these will all be non-fiction texts, so things like articles, autobiographies, letters, and the purpose here is for you to look at the viewpoints that the writer is expressing, but also to be able to analyse and compare those two texts. So what we would always say just to support you with this is just to make sure that outside of school you are reading as much and as often as you possibly can, just to support you with that text comprehension and understanding. For English language, you also have a spoken language assessment, which is a short presentation, and that is in a formal context where you're expected to use formal standard English. That is a compulsory part of your course, and you will be given a separate qualification for that. For English literature, as I said before, there are two papers, and on paper 1 you will have Macbeth and A Christmas Carol, and the purpose there is for you to be able to analyse those texts, looking at the key themes, the ideas, the characters, and also linking those texts to their wider social and historical contexts. On paper 2 you will have your modern text, which is An Inspector Calls, so that's a play, and you will also have your poetry element. So we study the power and conflict section of the anthology, and again there's a range of poems there from across different time periods, so some from the 19th century up to the modern day. And again, the purpose here is for you to be able to analyse the language and structure that has been used by a writer look at characters, look at themes, look at bigger concepts and ideas, and then also link those things back to their wider social contexts and thinking about the motivations as to why a writer might have created that particular text or play or poem. All of the exam papers and all of the courses for English are 100% examination. That means there is no coursework, it's just the exam papers. So for English language, there's those 2 exam papers. Both of them are worth 80 marks each, and they are 1 hour and 45 minutes, and they are 5 questions, and they are all written exams. The only one that's slightly different is your spoken language assessment. So this is your presentation element, and you will be awarded a pass, a merit, or a distinction for that. That grade itself doesn't actually affect your overall English language grade. Your English language grade comes from these 2 papers here, but it's a compulsory part of your English language course, and you will get a separate certificate which you can then pass on to colleges and employers. And that clear presentational talk and those communication skills are really strong transferable skills that you can take to colleges and employers. Again, English literature is 100% examination, so there's no coursework, it's just your written exams, and again it's these 2 papers here, so your Shakespeare and your 19th century novel, so Macbeth and A Christmas Carol. That is a 1 hour 45 minute exam, and that's a slightly smaller exam. It's worth 40% of your English literature GCSE. It's got 64 marks on that paper. This is the one that everyone panics a little bit about because it's such a long exam, but it's actually broken down into a number of different sections to make it much more manageable. So paper 2 is your modern text, Inspector Calls, and your poetry, your power and conflict anthology, as well as the unseen poetry. So it's 2 hours and 15 minutes, and that one is worth 60% of your GCSE for English literature. And that one is broken down into 3 separate sections for you, just to make that a little bit less daunting. So hopefully by the end of the 2-year course across English literature and English language, you will have been able to develop these skills. You should be able to pick out key information from a text and make some inferences based on that evidence. We'll spend a lot of time analysing a writer's methods, so that's their use of language and structure techniques. You will also be given the opportunity to evaluate ideas within texts and how successful you think writers have been. Hopefully get a little bit more of an understanding of wider social and historical context. So there's a nice overlap there to history and looking at how those wider social contexts have affected the texts and the meanings within them. And there's an element of comparison and also obviously looking at effective communication, and that's written communication in your exams, but also that spoken communication in your presentations. So I've just put in here for you some examples of students' work. So you can see here that one of the things that we will expect students to do in English is quite a lot of extended writing. Just because we've got so many essay questions and it is all exam based, we need students to be able to write for sustained periods of time. So this is an example here of a literature response. We also expect students to be taking a little bit more ownership over their notes. Their exercise books will be their main revision guide for their exams at the end of year 11. And everything that we do across year 10 and year 11 will come up on the exam paper. So what we really try and stress to students is the importance of making sure that everything is glued in and that everything has got really clear, really detailed annotation. Because if this is a piece of work that you do at the start of year 10 and then you pick your exercise book up again at the end of year 11 to revise, you need to understand all of those notes that you made sort of a year and a half beforehand. You can also see here that this student has been really conscientious, so their teacher has identified an area where they need to develop a little bit more, and they've gone away in a different coloured pen and added that development in. So a real focus there on moving up the mark scheme and developing those analytical skills. And also a number of different strategies for revision that we will go through. So this is an example of a revision clock and breaking down larger topics into smaller sections just to really help with remembering information and recalling of key quotations and key facts. All of the exams for English literature are closed book exams, which means that students won't have a copy of the text in the exam with them. For Macbeth and for A Christmas Carol, they will be given a short extract, but for all of their literature texts, students are expected to have a knowledge of the complete text and be able to recall key quotations. So we'll spend a lot of work practicing those recall skills and making sure that students have got all of that key information to hand when they need it. And then just to finish off, there's some frequently asked questions on here. So these are things that we get asked time and time again. So how many GCSEs do I get for English? And the answer to that is 2. You get 1 GCSE for English language and 1 GCSE in English literature. Students often want to know how long the exams are. So both of the language exams are 1 hour 45 minutes. English literature paper 1 is also 1 hour 45 minutes. And then English literature paper 2 is the big one, 2 hours and 15 minutes. Is there any coursework? The answer is no. The qualification is 100% examination. The only bit that we do outside of an exam setting is the presentation, which is done in small groups with class teachers. In terms of marks, there are 160 marks that are available for English language, and you get 80 of them on paper 1 and 80 on paper 2. And there are 160 marks in total for English literature, and they are 64 marks on paper 1 and 96 marks on paper 2. Students often also want to know what the pass mark is, so that changes each year. The grade boundaries are never fixed, never set in stone. However, you normally need around 48% to achieve a grade 4, which is a pass mark, and around about 54% to achieve a grade 5, which is what is considered as the strong pass grade. So as I say, those things aren't fixed, but that will just give you a general guide and a general indication. And then parents and carers often ask this question, whether students need to have read all of the literature text before starting the course. And the answer is no. We will read through those in lessons with students. However, it will be very beneficial to have read that text a couple of different times. So whether that is by borrowing a copy from school or using the school library or accessing a copy online and just going over that as part of your revision. And another thing that would help is reading other texts by the authors that we study. So reading other texts by Priestley, for example, who is the writer who wrote An Inspector Calls, just to get a real understanding of particular authors and the sorts of things that they talk about and the sorts of contexts that they are writing in. So English is obviously not an optional subject, but it is a subject that opens a lot of different doors and a lot of different pathways. So for the majority of colleges and employers, you will need to have a good pass mark in your English GCSE, and that is often a compulsory requirement for both college entries and apprenticeships and employments after year 11. Due to the nature of this qualification, though, there are so many transferable skills. You have got those analytical skills, that critical thinking, those communication skills, the awareness of bigger issues and the ideas of social contexts that you can transfer and hopefully communicate much more clearly. If you choose to study A-level English or English literature or language at A-level as a college, that can often lead to a number of different careers. So teaching, journalism is often one that students go into after studying English A-level, but all forms of writing or publishing, lots of jobs in the media that you can get into from an English perspective, things like screenwriting for TV programs and films, but also things like human resources, law, business management, marketing, PR, anywhere where you need to demonstrate good communication skills and a good understanding of wider issues and concepts. English will allow you to get onto all of those pathways. So hopefully that has answered any questions that people might have, but please do get in touch with us if there is anything further that you wish to know.